Привет! Today we have a very important, serious, but at the same time very interesting issue. The thing is that today we are not gonna talk about crimes, individuals, or anything connected with Russia, but we're gonna talk about Russia itself. Now everyone knows Russia as a huge country, starting in Eastern Europe and ending in Asia. But has anyone ever thought about how such a huge country appeared? The foundation dates of European countries are reliably known. Especially everything is known about the USA. But what about Russia? I think the most foreigners, when they hear the word Russia, imagine the Soviet Union. Well, maybe someone remembers that before it there was the Russian Empire. But what was before all that? How and when did a country that occupies 1/6 of the planet's land appeared? Who found it? And what was happening there? These are the questions that our first episode from the section From Ancient to Modern Russia is devoted to. My name is Tommy, and we're not getting started because I need to make a short disclaimer. The thing is that the history as a science is a very complex subject. For each event, there are several, and sometimes several dozens, different theories. And in the case of Russia, everything is even more complicated. Since the history is based on documents and records, it can be very difficult to determine the reliability of a particular event. Over 1,000 years, some documents haven't survived, and some were deliberately destroyed. Therefore, in this series of videos, I will rely on the most popular theories, and if there are many of them, I'll try to cite them all so you can make your own conclusions. And now, my name is Tommy, this is From Ancient to Modern Russia, and we begin.
Есть царь. Товарищи!
Now, looking at the world map, it's impossible not to find Russia, the largest country in the world. But it all started much more modestly. We are interested only in the western part of the map, namely the piece of land from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. It was a territory where the nation that would become future Russians settled. In general, it wasn't one nation, there were many of them. In the north, there were Finno-Ugric tribes. The Slavs occupied the middle part, and Khazars settled to the south. But the majority of people were still the Slavs. I'll make a separate video about who the Slavs were and where they came from on those lands. But for now, let's talk about various tribes that inhabited the territory of future Russia. Although the majority of the people living on those lands were of the same ethnicity, spoke particularly the same language, and had very similar culture and customs, they still represented different nations and tribes. Now these names mean a little, but the main tribes in this territory were Drevlani, Rюриковичи, Радимичи, Vyatichi, Krivichi, and Sloveni. The names are weird, I know, but at that time people called themselves like that. And as usually happened at that period, when several tribes are located in one piece of territory, they were engaged in two things: agriculture and cattle breeding, and war with neighbors. The last one was quite popular and was greatly reducing the population. In addition to internecine wars, the lands of future Russia were often attacked by the Gets from the north. If you live in any European country, there's no need to explain to you who they were. Probably these guys visited your country too. In Germany, they were known as Normans, in England as Danes, and in our territory as Varyagi. But for convenience and better understanding, we're gonna use the generally accepted name, Vikings. So the Vikings did exactly the same thing on the territory of Russia as they did everywhere else. They killed and robbed. Inhabiting these lands and immersed in internecine wars couldn't repel the conquerors from the north, so they quickly came under the control of the Vikings, who placed their people in the cities, established their own order, and began to collect tribute. Under the Vikings, people didn't feel good. and all the results of their labor were immediately confiscated for the personal needs of conquerors. But there was one positive moment. Since the Vikings were in power, the tribes didn't need to fight among themselves, and people began to unite. The result of this unification was that in the middle of 9th century, the tribes managed to kick Vikings out of their lands. People became free again. And if the threat was gone, they could resume the favorite pastime of all Slavic people, slaughtering each other, and the period of internecine wars began once again. But this time, people had already learned that it was possible to live without bloodshed. All they needed was a strong and powerful ruler. Since it was impossible to appoint such a ruler from local tribes leaders, it was decided to invite one from another country. From where? From Normandy, of course, from the land of the Vikings. Thus, in 862, Rurik arrived in Russia, and it was the beginning of the first Russian state. Let's start with the fact that at that time the state wasn't called Russia, but Rus, as some Vikings were called at that time. So who was the first Viking who founded Russia? The name Rurik itself certainly has Scandinavian roots. There it sounds like Hreker. In Latin it's Roricus. In Europe he was known as Rюrik. He was a Viking and served for a long time in the lands of Franks, present-day France, where he engaged in same traditional Viking activities, wars and looting, but no longer for personal needs, though he did it for personal needs too, but for the glory of the French monarchy. But in 860s, Rurik suddenly disappears from European chronicles and appears in Rus. Coincidence? According to the most widespread and plausible version, the choice of Slavic tribes fell on Rurik because of his rich military experience and experience in participating in state affairs, because Rurik served in Europe for a long time. Having received an invitation to reign in the Russian lands, Rurik didn't hesitate for long, and 862 appeared in the north of Russia, together with his brothers, Sineas and Truvar. Rurik, as the eldest, occupied the city of Novgorod in the north. Sineas fell in love with the city of Beloozero, a little to the east, and Truvar settled in Izborsk in the west. All these lands were united under the name of Rus. This small piece of land became the beginning of the future huge Russia. 2 years later, Rurik's brothers Sineas and Truvar died. Then Rurik decided to unite all the territories of his brothers and his own into one common monarchy, simultaneously adding small neighboring tribes. Thus, the first monarchy in the history of Russia was born, and Rurik has become the first Tsar in history. This is how Russia has been founded. If you are surprised that Russia was created by the Vikings, then don't forget to push like and subscribe everywhere, because it will only get more interesting. And it was Sabir and Tommy, and from ancient to modern Russia. До скорого!